Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Channel Show. But I was trying to clear up some space on my computer, and I realized I still had this list on my computer, and that also made me realize that it has been a few years since I added to the series, and I really did not mean to stop doing the series because I really enjoyed it. And this was like, I think maybe back in 2020, I think this was back 2020, 2021 to 2022, so it has been a few years, and I wanted to get back on the series. And with the first two videos that I did that are in the playlist linked down below in the description, I may update those first two videos. It was the spring to summer seasonal transition book recommendations video, and then the summer to fall one. I may update those, but I'll only be updating those lists if enough people ask for updated lists. And once I actually finish this series, once I do the winter to spring seasonal transition book recommendations video, once I do that, only then, and only if I have people asking for updated lists, only then will I update the lists. So I don't have any books behind me because about half of the books on this list are already packed in the boxes. I was considering showing the books that I still had on my shelves, but since about half of them are already packed, I'm just gonna show the pictures of the covers in the usual spot right here. And for a majority of these books, I won't be giving too much of a description, either because they're talked about a lot and enough on social media, or I may think that it's better to go into the book with as little knowledge about it as possible. But with all that said, let's get into this list. So the first book is The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien, and I know that the basic discourse, half joking, half serious, is that the Silmarillion, no one can read that. It's so hard to get through. However, if you feel like you can get through it, definitely try to give it a read during this transition from fall into winter. I'm gonna try not to say that too much, the seasonal transition. I'm gonna try not to say that too much, but The Silmarillion is a good book. It was hard to get through, but at the same time, it was worth it. The next book is Unfinished Tales by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now you'll either see it as Unfinished Tales of Numenor and Middle-earth like you see in the picture here, or it'll be just Unfinished Tales. And with this one, again, very kind of cozy fall going into winter vibes. And the next one is Murder Your Employer by Rupert Holmes. This one I really enjoyed. I surprisingly enjoyed it, and I feel like it's one of the mystery thriller books that is very unique and that we need more of. Not necessarily more books like Murder Your Employer, but we just need more that use different takes on tropes within the murder mystery thriller genres, and also just, I know this is very tropey to say, but aren't like the other girls, so to say, aren't like the other books. Just because for me, a large reason why I have such a hard time getting into murder mysteries and thriller books is because so many of the books, not all of them, but so many of the books are like each other that it gets to a point where, for me at least, it starts to feel like once you've read one, you've read them all. Once you've read 5, you've read them all. However, with Murder Your Employer, this was perfect. It was unique. It was fun in a kind of morbid way, and I cannot wait for the sequel. The next book is When You Wish Upon a Star by Elizabeth Lim, and this is a Disney twisted tale focusing on the question of what if the Blue Fairy was not supposed to help Pinocchio. I'm not a big Pinocchio fan, but I love Elizabeth Lim's writing, and I decided to give this book a chance, and I loved it. The next book is Bravely by Maggie Stiefvater. I hadn't read anything by Maggie Stiefvater before, and I haven't read anything else by her since I read Bravely, but I really liked this book. I absolutely loved it. You're following Clandebroch and Merida. Sometime later, it's a few years later, and the boys have started growing up. Merida is basically sent, she's not really sent, she's sort of sent on a mission to kind of help save Clandebroch and her family. I'm not going to say why though. The next book is 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. This was the book that got me into Elizabeth Lim's writing, and I had seen it around on social media saying oh, it's a retelling of The Wild Swans. I didn't grow up on The Wild Swans specifically, the folktale, but I grew up on a Western European version of it, I think Germanic version, called The Three Ravens, and I specifically grew up on the Jim Henson licensed storyteller version of The Three Ravens. And if I did my research correctly, and if I'm remembering correctly, The Wild Swans was more of the Russian, Asian area, and The Wild Swans version of the folktale was more so Russia and Asian countries. Kind of later on in life, like when I was early to mid-teens, is when I was introduced to the Mikhail Baryshnikov's Stories from My Childhood version of The Wild Swans, which I absolutely love. So getting back to the point, when I saw that Six Crimson Cranes was being promoted as a Wild Swans retelling, I was like, I am latching onto this book. I read it. There's so many other folktales woven into Six Crimson Cranes. I absolutely loved this book. Essentially, you're following a young girl who's trying to defeat her evil stepmother, an enchantress who cursed her brothers to be cranes. The next book is The Last Russian Doll. Now, this is one that I won't say too much about because this is a book, even though it's historical fiction, this is a book that you really should go into knowing little about. And you're following a main character who is trying to figure out her past. She's not super young in the timelines. It's a very soft dual timeline book. And in the first timeline, it's 1917, 1918. So Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. So Bolshevik Revolution is basically right on the horizon happening. And then you have a decade later, and this young woman is trying to figure out why she has this Russian doll, why her mother gave this to her. And that's all you really need to know about this book, because like I said, this one, even though it's historical fiction, you should go into it with very little knowledge about the plot and the synopsis. The next book is The Disappearance of Astrid Picard by Natasha Lester. This is a dual timeline book, and the first timeline is set kind of around World War II, and you're following Astrid Picard, who is the muse of, I blanked on his name for a second, Christian Dior. She's the main fashion outfit designer for Christian Dior, and one day she disappears. And then more modern times, you're following her granddaughter, I believe, and her granddaughter's another muse for another famous person within the industry, and just trying to navigate that legacy of being Astrid Picard's granddaughter, of being a Picard. A lot of intrigue, a lot of fashion, World War II, Christian Dior. The next book is The Three Lives of Alex St. Pierre, also by Natasha Lester, and this one is so far the only single timeline book from Natasha Lester. You're kind of in the late 1940s, early 1950s. There are some flashback scenes to World War II, but essentially Astrid Picard is Alex. But essentially during World War II, Alex St. Pierre worked as a spy for the Allies, and then after the war, she went to work for Christian Dior as like the press liaison of sorts, and her past starts coming back to haunt her. The next book I'm not talking about too much because it was one of the TikTok sweethearts, is one of the TikTok book talk sweethearts, and that is Circe by Madeline Miller. I love this. I honestly prefer it more than The Song of Achilles, and Circe specifically is very much a good book for most of the seasonal transitions, but specifically the one we're in now, autumn to winter. It just has those vibes naturally. The next book is The Last Tale of the Flower Bard by Roshani Chokshi, and this one has gothic vibes all over it, and that was the intention with this book, so it's perfect. Like, I honestly picture most gothic books or books with gothic vibes, I honestly picture them. Or books with gothic vibes, I know a lot of people put them into like autumn Halloween-y time, but I honestly think they're so perfect for the autumn to winter transition, because as much as I love winter, it can also be kind of gloomy. The next book is The Foxwife by Young-ji Chu, and this one is set kind of in the colder months, like December, January, February-ish, and you're basically following this fox spirit, and she is trying to find the person who unalived her child. So trigger warnings for The Foxwife, but it is such a good book. The next book is The Circus Train by Amita Parikh, and this is one I feel like I don't talk about a whole lot, but at the same time I feel like I do talk about it a lot. And this is set World War II, and you're following a young girl named Lena, and she lives with her father, who is part of a traveling circus that goes across Europe. And one day she meets a young Jewish boy, and initially they're hiding him out at first and just keeping him safe. And then one day the Nazis take Lena's father and the young boy, I'm blanking on his name right now, and this is like another soft dual timeline book. There is a second timeline where Lena's an adult, but I'm not going to say too much about that one because that would give too much away. The next book is The London Seance Society by Sarah Penner, and I absolutely love this one. I tried reading her other book, The Apothecary something, Lost Apothecary, and it was interesting. I think I finished it. It was interesting. It just wasn't my favorite. So the London Seance Society is kind of, again, in that gothic Victorian-esque framework and vibes with magic and seances and ghosts. So perfect for Halloween and also perfect for transitioning into winter. The next book is River Sing Me Home by Eleanor Shearer. And this one, I will say right off the bat, a lot of these books I would recommend looking into trigger warnings for. But this one especially, I would highly recommend looking at trigger warnings or looking up trigger warnings for this one, because it is a very heart-wrenching story, and you're following a mother, I think post-slavery, like immediately post-slavery, like within those couple of years, post the Emancipation Proclamation. So technically slaves are free, but that doesn't mean that Southern slave owners are following that. This mom runs away from the plantation she was on and goes in search of the children she was separated from. But River Sing Me Home is 100% a book that I think everyone should read. Again, like I said, looking at trigger warnings, but it's something that I feel like everyone needs to read and that people need to discuss more. And the last book is Did You Hear About Kitty Carr by Crystal Smith Paul. And this book, I honestly feel that this book is what The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo was trying to be. I've read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I did like it, but kind of looking back on it, it's not as good as I feel a lot of people make it out to be. And Did You Hear About Kitty Carr is so much better, and it handles that kind of plot line and premise so much better than the way Evelyn Hugo did. And specifically in Kitty Carr, the actress Kitty Carr had passed away, and she left her estate to her neighbors and the daughters specifically of one neighbor. And they're all like, oh yeah, she was very nice, but why would she leave it to us? Yeah, that's all I'll say about it. Again, a book that you should not go into knowing too much about, and also, again, look up trigger warnings. If there are any other books that you feel like would fit the autumn, fall to winter transition, please comment down below and leave your suggestions. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.